Some betrayals arrive like a thunderclap. Others, like mine, whisper in, wrapped in routine and perfume. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 48 years old, an operations manager for a logistics firm headquartered in Austin, Texas. I've been married to Laura for 16 years. She teaches English at a private high school, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns and tuition that gets parents whispering at dinner parties. We live in a quiet suburb just north of the city, where the mail arrives on time and the neighbors know your dog's name. Until recently, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about my life. Then I got a text that rearranged it all. It started on a Thursday morning in April, just before Laura's conference in San Diego. I remember it because I'd taken the day off to drive her to the airport. I stood in our bedroom doorway, sipping coffee, watching her pack. She had her conference badge laid out on the bed next to a navy blue blouse and a surprisingly lacy black dress I hadn't seen before. There was something different about her movements, more deliberate, more elegant. She even curled her hair. For a professional development event? You sure you've got everything? I asked. She didn't look up. I think so. It's just 5 days. Some breakout sessions, a networking dinner or two. Nothing fancy. But the way she folded that dress said otherwise. I noticed the small bottle of her favorite perfume, sandalwood and citrus, the one I gave her last Christmas, tucked neatly between her flats and a travel-sized bottle of wine. You bringing the good stuff? I joked. She smiled, but it was tight. Maybe the dinners will be nicer than I thought. I didn't think much of it. Not then. You learn to ignore the small mysteries in long marriages. They pile up, sure, but you assume they don't mean anything. That they're just wrinkles. Harmless. I helped her with her suitcase, kissed her goodbye in the driveway. She hugged me longer than usual, which felt comforting at the time. Now I wonder if it was guilt or a kind of farewell. I watched her taillights disappear down the street and went back inside, already planning a weekend of barbecued ribs, cold beer, and some overdue garage organization. I was halfway through sorting old fishing tackle when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message read, "Check the Bayview Grand. Roommate 42. She's not at any conference." My thumb hovered over the delete button. Scam, I thought. Sick prank? Or someone with the wrong number. But a tightness had crept into my chest, that animal sense we train ourselves to ignore. I opened my laptop. The conference Laura mentioned, the Western Educators Symposium, was real. I found it on the San Diego Convention Center site. But when I searched the list of scheduled speakers and registered attendees, there was no Laura Carter. No English department. No affiliated school. Still, it could have been a mistake. So I went further. I called the school she supposedly represented. The receptionist hesitated before saying, "She's on vacation leave this week. Didn't mention a conference." That's when I stopped rationalizing. When a man starts checking, he already knows. I called the Bayview Grand Hotel in downtown San Diego. Asked calmly to be connected to roommate 42. They did. It rang twice. A man's voice answered. "This is Ben," he said. I didn't speak. I just listened to the silence on the other end, then hung up. I sat there for a long time, the cursor blinking on the search bar, the garage quiet except for the ticking of an old wall clock. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened an empty legal pad and began writing names, dates, passwords. Strategy. This wasn't a heartbreak story. It was a chessboard. What do you do when you're not just betrayed, but underestimated? I didn't sleep much that Sunday night, but not from nerves. My mind was too alert for that. I wasn't pacing or replaying emotional speeches in my head. I was organizing. Quietly. Precisely. I packed a carry-on bag before dawn. A light jacket, neutral clothes, basic toiletries, nothing dramatic. If someone passed me in the airport, they'd assume I was just another business traveler. A man heading west to shake hands, take meetings, and return with a folder full of polite notes. Let them think that. The flight from Austin to San Diego was smooth. I didn't read or check my email. I watched the clouds move under us, thought about the message I'd received, about roommate 42, and replayed the man's voice who answered my call. This is Ben. Calm. Casual. Too comfortable. I arrived just before 9 a.m., local time. The Bayview Grand stood tall in downtown San Diego, all chrome and quiet luxury. It wasn't the kind of place a school teacher would normally stay unless someone else was covering the bill. I didn't walk straight in. First, I circled the block twice. Measured my surroundings. Looked at the cars, the rhythm of guests leaving, the movements of bellhops. I wasn't looking for them yet. I was studying the field. Then I crossed the street to a small cafe with a direct view of the hotel entrance. I ordered black coffee, no food, and took a seat near the window. It wasn't long before I saw them. Laura and the man. She wore sunglasses and a thin white scarf, even though the morning was warm. He rolled her suitcase behind him, the navy Samsonite I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. She used to complain that it didn't glide well. Funny what sticks in your head. They weren't touching. But they didn't need to. You could see it in their movements, in the relaxed way they walked beside each other. The intimacy was already baked into the silence between them. He leaned close. She laughed. She touched his arm. They approached a rideshare waiting at the curb. The driver got out, took the suitcase. Laura slid into the back seat. The man followed. And just like that, they were gone. I sat back in my chair, let the heat of the coffee mug settle into my hands. I wasn't angry. Not then. Not even sad. I was still. Cold. Resolved. I paid, tipped well, and crossed the street. Walked into the Bayview Grand like I belonged there. At the front desk, I approached calmly. I said, "I think I may have left something in a friend's room. Roommate 42. I visited earlier this week. Could you check with housekeeping? Just looking for a pair of sunglasses." The clerk was young, indifferent. He said, "Roommate 42? Already cleared. Guest checked out this morning." I nodded. "That's all right. Thanks for checking," he said. "Would you like to leave your contact in case they turn something in?" I said, "No, that won't be necessary." I stepped aside, found a quiet chair near the elevators, pulled out my phone. Within 5 minutes, I'd created a dummy email account and submitted a guest feedback form, asking for an itemized room receipt to help with corporate reimbursement. The name I used was simple. Nondescript. The kind of name no one remembers. Then I left. I checked into a different hotel near the marina under my real name. Something modest, clean, with a view of the water. I wasn't running. I was preparing. That evening, I opened my laptop and went through our shared credit card statement. I wasn't looking for fireworks. Just patterns. There it was. Friday night. A charge for $168. Lance Bistro. Downtown San Diego. French-Asian fusion. Prefix only. Laura had a rule: we didn't dine alone at places like that. She always said, "It's only special if we both taste it." I guess she'd made an exception. I closed the laptop. Sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I didn't call her. Didn't text. She was still in the air, flying home. Probably thinking of how to spend the weekend. Maybe she'd mention panel discussions. Maybe she'd say she missed me. Maybe she'd believe I was still asleep inside the story she gave me. Let her believe it. Because when people think they've gotten away with something, they relax. And that's when you learn the most. So I waited. Patiently. Quietly. Tomorrow, she'd come home to the man she thought she still understood. She had no idea she was walking into a new game, one I was now controlling. She thought I'd be waiting with flowers. I'll be waiting with silence. Laura's flight landed at 5:42 p.m., Central Time. I knew because I tracked it. Not obsessively, just like you track the arrival of a delayed delivery. Something scheduled to arrive that might need your signature. I didn't pick her up. She didn't ask. Instead, I made sure to leave the garage door open and dinner half prepared, enough to suggest normalcy, but not effort. I left the TV on, volume low, tuned to the local news. Nothing about the house looked off. That was intentional. I wanted her to feel safe. Predictable. Like the story she'd rehearsed all weekend could land softly without interruption. The front door opened at 6:17 p.m. I heard her key in the lock, the soft clatter of wheels bumping over the threshold. I stayed on the couch, still, watching a segment about a local charity event. She walked into the living room, suitcase behind her, hair slightly tousled from travel. She looked careful. She said, "Hey." I answered, "Hey. How was the conference?" She shrugged off her coat and gave a rehearsed sigh. She said, "Long. Some good sessions, though. I'm glad to be home." I nodded. She moved closer, leaned down, kissed my cheek, delicately, as if afraid it might not land. It didn't. "Not really," she said. "Thanks for keeping things together while I was gone." I said, "Sure." She smiled. Or tried to. Then walked past me toward the bedroom. The suitcase bumped softly behind her. I waited until I heard the door click shut. Then I muted the TV. The interesting thing about lies is how hard they try to stay quiet. They mimic real memories. They fill space with details that sound almost right. But they rot. They crumble the more you touch them. At dinner, she talked in fragments, about panel discussions that probably never happened, about a keynote speaker who didn't exist, and about a networking lunch at a cafe that I knew was across the street from the hotel where she shared a room with another man. I didn't challenge a single word. Instead, I asked, "Did you get a chance to walk by the bay?" She blinked. She said, "Which bay?" I said, "The marina. Near your hotel." A pause. She said, "Oh, yeah?" Briefly. Between sessions. She didn't know the hotel I'd stayed in was near that very marina. That I'd walked it twice. That I'd stood near the water's edge and looked up at the windows, wondering if one of them belonged to her. Later that night, when she showered, I checked her suitcase. Not out of suspicion, I already knew. I just wanted to see how much effort she put into curating the story. There were no conference materials. No lanyard. No brochures. Just the black dress I'd noticed when she packed it. It still smelled like perfume and wine. She'd folded it carefully. Almost reverently. I placed it back exactly as I found it. The next morning, I made her coffee. She thanked me. Kissed my cheek again. Then she left for work, same schedule, same tone, same everything. Routine is a wonderful cover. People return to it quickly, hoping it'll patch whatever rip they've made. But I don't operate on hope. I work in pattern and discipline. That day, I submitted a request to our credit union, itemized statements from the last 3 months. I also contacted a friend in IT consulting, quietly, and asked about discrete data recovery tools for deleted texts. Not for Laura's phone, but for an old backup I'd stored on my own laptop months ago. Something I kept when I switched phones and synced everything once by accident. That accident was about to become very useful. By Wednesday, I had the email from the Bayview Grand's accounting office. The receipt. Room 842. 4 nights. 2 guests. Charges for spa services, late-night room service, and one charge that made me pause. Bottle service, in-room, $210. On Saturday night. The same night she messaged me saying she was too tired to call. That evening, when she came home, I had dinner ready. Filet and mashed potatoes. Her favorite. She smiled like everything was normal. She said, "This looks amazing." I said, "Long day?" She said, "Not too bad. The juniors are working on essays. It's quiet." I said, "That's good. You deserve quiet." She toasted with her wine. We ate in silence for most of it. But right as she reached for her phone, I leaned back. I said, "You know, I was thinking, maybe we should get away. Together." She looked surprised. she said. Really? I said. Yeah. Someplace coastal. Nice hotel. Wine. Just us. She smiled, almost melting. Maybe she thought it was forgiveness. Maybe she thought I'd never known. That I'd never looked. Never left town. She said. That sounds perfect. I nodded. It does. I stood, cleared the plates. Washed them without a word. She stayed at the table, phone in hand, fingers typing something with that casual rhythm of someone who thinks they're still in control. She didn't notice I was watching her reflection in the kitchen window. She didn't see that I wasn't smiling. She came home to the man she thought she left behind. But I'd been building something behind my silence, and it's almost finished. The morning after our perfect dinner, I sat in my truck outside her school for 27 minutes. I wasn't there to confront her. I wasn't there to spy in the traditional sense. I was there to understand timing, habits, when she arrived, where she parked, who she greeted first. People will tell you everything without saying a word, if you're patient enough to watch. At 7:14 a.m., she pulled into the faculty lot. Waved to a younger teacher. Same routine, every Tuesday, I assumed. I watched until she disappeared through the double doors. Then I left, slowly, unhurried, like someone running errands with nowhere urgent to be. That afternoon, I met with Mark Winston. Mark's been a private investigator for almost 15 years. Not the trench coat and fedora type. He dresses like a golf pro and carries himself like a dentist, calm, methodical, unassuming. We shook hands in the back of a quiet cafe in North Austin. I handed him the folder I'd assembled, email screenshots, the Bayview Grand receipt, the name Ben. He flipped through it in silence. He said, "What exactly are you looking for, Daniel?" I said, "Confirmation. Identity. A timeline. I don't need drama, I need proof." He nodded. "You'll have it by the end of the week." That's all we said. That's all we needed to say. That evening, Laura came home humming. She kissed my cheek again, another quiet test. I let it land. She poured wine, asked what I was watching, mentioned something about a student who'd plagiarized an essay. Her voice sounded lighter. She believed the storm had passed. She believed I hadn't seen the wreckage. We were still playing chess. She thought she was a few moves ahead. She hadn't realized I'd changed the board. By Friday, Mark delivered. His report was methodical. Detailed. No flourishes, no embellishments. Just timestamps, photos, confirmation. The man's name was Ben Whitaker. 39. Divorced. Works in finance. Mid-level partner at a private wealth firm in San Diego. Met Laura at a teachers' conference last fall in Dallas. Their first traceable contact, a LinkedIn message. The conversations moved to private email, then phone calls, then weekend retreats. This wasn't an affair of desperation. It wasn't physical impulse. It was planned. Measured. She wasn't running from something. She was building something, with him. There were photos. I didn't dwell on them. I saw what I needed to see. The body language. Her smile. The hand resting on his forearm. She looked young. She looked light. I didn't hate her. I just didn't recognize her anymore. That night, she brought home Chinese food and suggested we watch something funny. She curled up next to me on the couch, like we were college kids again. I let her. She said, "It's good to feel like us again." I said, "Yeah. It is." She fell asleep halfway through the movie. Head against my shoulder. Like she trusted me completely. I watched her sleep for a moment. Then I stood, turned off the TV, and walked outside into the backyard. The night air was warm, still. I sat on the steps and stared at the oak tree we planted a decade ago. Its roots were strong. Its branches tangled. It had outgrown the space we thought it would occupy. So had we. The next day, I did something simple. I moved money. Quietly. Precisely. I transferred funds into a new account under my name alone. I printed out copies of all shared assets. Took photos of every important document in the house. I wasn't stealing. I was preserving. I also changed my phone passcode and desynced shared devices. She wouldn't notice right away. But she would. On Sunday afternoon, she asked if I wanted to go hiking at Lake Travis. I said yes. We walked the trail like people on the mend. We laughed. Took pictures. She posted one with the caption, "Just us. Just peace." I said nothing. Let her enjoy the illusion a little longer. Because a story only ends cleanly when the last chapter is written by the right hand. And I was finally holding the pen. She built her second life in shadows. I'm bringing light to it, cold, clean, and final. By the following week, I had gathered everything I needed. Documents. Timelines. Photographic evidence. Patterns of contact. I didn't have to imagine anything anymore. Laura's double life was fully sketched out, dated, categorized, and printed in a neat folder labeled Personal. I kept it in my office drawer locked. Not because I feared she'd find it, but because symbols matter. Some truths aren't meant for kitchen counters or casual discovery. They're meant for confrontation. For control. She kept floating through our days like nothing had happened. She made grocery lists, sent goodnight texts from work, kissed my shoulder as I read the paper on Saturday mornings. I watched all of it. She wasn't lying anymore, she was performing. And like all performers, she was confident only as long as the lights stayed on. On Monday, I arranged a consultation with a divorce attorney in Westlake. Discreet building. Frosted glass doors. Clean and efficient. His name was Alan Price, sharp suit, older than me, with the look of a man who'd seen hundreds of marriages end in silence. He said, "I assume this is about infidelity?" I said, "It is." He asked, "Do you have proof?" I slid the folder across the table. He opened it, skimmed 3 pages, closed it again. He said, "You'll have options. A clean exit if you want it. Possibly stronger leverage if you choose to press. No kids, no contested property. This can be surgical." I nodded. That word landed right. Surgical. On Wednesday, Laura texted me during lunch. "Thinking about you. Miss your face. Let's do something just us this weekend." I replied, "Let's talk tonight. I have something on my mind." At home, she prepared salmon. Lit candles. She wore a blue blouse I always liked, the one she used to save for school board nights. She was making an effort now. Trying to resecure the foundation she didn't realize I'd already removed. Over dinner, I didn't raise my voice. I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer carefully." She paused, fork midair. She said, "Okay." I said, "Is there anything you need to tell me about your trip to San Diego?" She blinked. Her fingers tightened on the fork. She said, "No." "Why?" I said, "Nothing happened? No one else was there with you?" She hesitated. "Not long. Just enough." She said, "Why are you asking me this?" I looked at her calmly. I said, "Because I already know Laura." She didn't move. Didn't deny. Didn't reach for the wine. Her face went neutral, not shocked, not angry. Just calculating. She said, "Who told you?" I said, "You did. You just didn't know it." She stared at me for a long time. Then she put her fork down. She said, "What now?" I stood up. Walked to the hallway. Returned with the folder. Placed it beside her plate. She didn't touch it. I said, "Now we talk like adults. You tell me how far this has gone. And then I tell you what comes next." She didn't open the folder. But she didn't need to. She knew what was in it. Knew what it meant. She said, "I didn't mean for this to happen." I said, "That's not an answer. That's a script." Silence. Then she whispered, "I don't love him." I answered, "But you chose him." Repeatedly. She looked down. She said, I thought you didn't see me anymore. I said. No. You thought I'd never see the truth. She cried. Quietly. Not the kind of tears that seek forgiveness, but the kind that admit defeat. I didn't comfort her. I didn't speak again. I just cleared the dishes, washed them, wiped down the counter. She sat at the table the whole time, staring at the folder. Not touching it. That night, I slept in the guest room. First time in 16 years. The sheets were stiff. The air colder. I stared at the ceiling for hours, not regretting the confrontation, but calculating its next step. I wasn't angry. I was clearer than I'd been in years. I'd reclaimed something that night. Not her. Not the marriage. My silence. My edge. In the morning, I made coffee for one. She didn't come into the kitchen. I left the house at 8 a.m. sharp. And for the first time in a month, I drove with the windows down. She thought silence meant weakness. But silence is a blade when held by the right hand. The day after I left her sitting in the kitchen with that folder, she didn't go to work. I know because I passed by the school's parking lot on my way to the office, habit now, and her spot was empty. I didn't call. I didn't text. She didn't either. Instead, she waited. When I returned home that evening, the lights were off except in the kitchen. She was at the table again. The folder sat in front of her, still unopened. Her eyes were red, but she didn't look weak. She looked surrendered. She said, I read enough. I didn't sit. I placed my keys on the counter, poured water, stood by the sink. She said, You've already seen a lawyer? I answered, I have. She nodded slowly, like it was a courtesy she'd expected. She said, So this is it. I said, That's up to you. She blinked. Up to me? I said, How we end this will say more about us than how we started. I finally sat down across from her. I said, I don't want a war. I want clarity. I want this clean. She looked away. She said, What do you want me to do? I said, Tell the truth. To me. To yourself? And when the time comes, to others. She didn't argue. That told me everything I needed to know. We spent the next hour speaking in the kind of quiet voices you use at funerals. She admitted they'd been involved for months. That it started emotionally, escalated gradually. That she thought I had stopped seeing her, that I had faded into a schedule, a house, a list of shared bills and neutral dinners. She didn't say, I love him. Not once. That mattered. When she finished, I nodded. Not in approval, just acknowledgement. I said, I'll handle the legal work. You'll sign. She said, Will you tell people what happened? I said, Only if I need to. She said, That's fair. We didn't speak after that. She went to bed. I stayed up, reviewing financials one more time, going line by line through the shared account until nothing in it belonged to a marriage anymore. Over the next few days, we lived like guests in a house that no longer felt like ours. She slept in the master bedroom. I stayed in the guest room. We didn't touch. We didn't argue. We moved like diplomats after a ceasefire. I filed the papers quietly, as Alan Price advised. Texas law made it relatively simple. No children, equal contributions, clearly documented property. Still, I paid the extra for expedited processing. She signed without comment. The only moment of friction came when I suggested she leave the house. She said, You want me to move out? I said, It's not a punishment. It's logistics. I'm not leaving the home I paid for, built around, and protected. Not for you. Not for him. She didn't fight. She asked for a month. I gave her 3 weeks. It was in that final stretch, those 21 days, that the silence between us took on a different shape. Not angry. Not fragile. But firm. She made arrangements. Found a condo closer to her school. Her friends started hearing things, vague things. They're separating. Mutual decision. She didn't mention the affair. She didn't mention Ben. Neither did I. I let her keep her dignity, but only because I no longer needed it for anything. On her last weekend in the house, she made dinner. I didn't ask her to. Chicken with rosemary. Mashed potatoes. A bottle of the wine we used to drink in our early 30s. She said, "I'm sorry it ended like this." I said, "I'm not." She blinked. "You're not?" I said, "No. Because it had already ended. You just wrote the last line first." She didn't cry. She nodded. We ate in silence. No candles. No music. Just the sound of forks against ceramic and a clock we both stopped checking weeks ago. That night, she didn't sleep in the bedroom. She took the guest room. I don't know if it was shame or respect. I didn't ask. The next morning, she packed. I didn't help. At the door, she stood with her keys in one hand, the handle of her suitcase in the other. She said, "You're still the best man I ever knew." I answered, "Then you should have acted like it." She left. Didn't look back. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. She walked out thinking the worst was over. But endings are never about leaving, they're about what you leave behind. 3 weeks passed. The house was quiet. Not in the heavy, suffocating way it had been before, but in a way that finally made sense. Everything in its place. Nothing waiting to be said. I had my mornings back. I cooked for one. Cleaned only what I used. I moved through the space like someone who had made peace not just with the end of something, but with what that ending had revealed. Laura texted once. Just once. She wrote, "I hope you're doing okay." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to correct or forgive. She had made her choices. So had I. I focused on rebuilding. Not the marriage, not even my routines. Just my silence. My calm. My time. I met with my financial advisor. Reworked my estate plan. Switched insurance policies, digital accounts, passwords. I claimed every corner of my life again. Then one afternoon, Mark, the investigator, called. He said, "I thought you might want to know. She's still seeing him. The San Diego guy." I answered, "Not surprised." He said, "She's not living there. Still in Austin. Alone." I said, "Okay." That was all. There was no satisfaction in hearing what I already knew. I had stopped caring who she was with the moment she walked out of the house and didn't take my respect with her. By early summer, I booked a hiking trip in Colorado. Just me. A remote cabin outside Durango. No reception, no distractions. I packed light and drove without music. Let the silence stretch across the plains and into the canyons. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. One morning, I stood on a ridge overlooking a quiet lake. Still water. Pine trees on all sides. I watched my breath fog in the cool air and realized, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't hoping for closure or clarity. I had both. Weeks later, I ran into her by accident. It was at a grocery store in Round Rock. I was picking up coffee and eggs. She was in the frozen section. Our carts came close. She stopped, looked at me. She said, "Daniel, you look good." I replied, "I am." She stood for a moment, hesitating. Then she said, "I think about us. A lot." I answered, "I don't." She didn't smile. Just nodded, slowly. I could see the question forming in her eyes. But I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked away, pushing my cart toward checkout without looking back. Because that's the difference between leaving and losing. One walks out. The other never turns around. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, about real men who don't raise their voice. They act. Coldly. To the end.